following program contains scenes that some viewers may find disturbing.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, May 7th, 1998. It's a few minutes after 2 in the morning. Grad student Paramatma Greeley hears a troubling sound from across the hall. He thinks it's coming from his neighbor's apartment, fellow University of Pennsylvania student Shannon Schieber.
Shannon?
Philadelphia Police 109.
Hello, my next door neighbor, I just heard her yelling for help, and I knocked on the door and I just heard like a choking type sound, and so I just called.
251 South 23rd. Let us know as soon as possible.
Okay.
All right.
Uniformed police officers receive a call. They promptly respond to Shannon's apartment.
Please, open up.
They're met by the neighbor who says, I think I heard screams coming from the apartment.
Please, open up.
The officers knock on the door.
Please, open up.
There's no response at the door. The officers saw no indication that anything had taken place, that there was any crime being committed, or that anybody's safety was in jeopardy. And the officers decide not to kick the door in, but to resume patrol.
Our son was passing through Philadelphia that day. He was going to stop and have lunch with Shannon. And Shannon had not showed up at the place where they were going to meet. Sean had tried to call her, and nobody could get any information from her.
Worried, Sean calls his mother back in Maryland.
He said, Mom, there's a problem. And so I said, what you have to do is go push all those 6 buttons on the front door. Maybe somebody will answer the door.
Shannon! Shannon, Sean! Shannon! It's Sean! Open the door! I don't know what's going on.
Shannon's neighbor, Paramatma Greeley, lets Sean in.
I remember going into the bathroom there out by my office and just putting my head down and just crying.
Shannon! Shannon, open the door! It's Sean!
I just said, if ever there was a time in my life, I said, please, God, please, don't let anything be bad.
Okay, we gotta break it down. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
There my son found his sister's dead body. She was facing down on the bed and she was dead. And he fainted.
Philadelphia Police 117.
Hello, it seems the person is dead in the next door. Her brother came over, she was supposed to be at work. We just broke down the door. All right. I called last night. I heard what I thought was yell. I called the cops, and we knocked on the door.
Shannon Schieber was 23 years old. about to graduate from Wharton, one of the top business schools in the country.
Well, what happens when somebody calls you on the phone and tells you your daughter's dead? You know, it's a crushing blow.
You just want to get so mad at God, you know, say, why did this happen to her? She wanted to make such a difference. She could have made your world, God, so much better. Why did this happen?
When you first get there and you examine the scene and everything, Shannon's found on the bed face down. There was bruising on her body. She was naked, and there were marks around her neck. And it appears that there was a struggle, that she was manually strangled.
When you go over the crime scene, you see blood splattered on the wall behind the headboard of the bed.
It was not Shannon's blood, because there was not really, she wasn't cut or anything like that, but there had been a struggle.
It appeared that Shannon was startled, confronted after coming out of a bath. The detectives at the scene thought it may be crime involving sexual activity, possibly a rape.
Check for witnesses.
Shannon's life was filled with so much promise. How could this happen to a clever and popular young woman?
Who could have wanted to harm my daughter? She was president of the student body. She was a presidential award finalist. She was a National Merit Scholar finalist. She really wanted to help people and do something good and be remembered for that.
This is a parent's worst nightmare.
We knew we had to go to Philadelphia. We had to identify a dead body. You can imagine the longest 2 hours of your life on that road. Whatever could have happened. Whatever could have happened. You know, you just can't imagine. You can't imagine what could have happened.
We went directly to Shannon's apartment, and we were met at the apartment door.
All we knew was that she was dead, but we knew nothing about why or what had happened or anything.
Adding to their woes, the Sheebers learn their son, Sean, is one of the prime suspects.
You want to start your investigation closest to the victim. So naturally, homicide detectives talk to Shannon's brother and a neighbor.
They respected each other.
Did your son get along with your daughter? Was there maybe some sibling rivalry, or there was some anger management issues or something like that? And are you sure he didn't come up here last night?
She would tell us that we didn't.
It was just the most stressful thing I can ever imagine going through.
What time was that? Your phone call last night.
After interrogating the two men for several hours, the police realize they're innocent and cut them loose.
From the building or outside?
Investigators turn their focus to Shannon's final hours. She was studying for a final exam in the morning. At 10 p.m., she spoke to her brother and said she'd meet him for lunch after the exam. 2 hours earlier, she told her mother she was looking forward to the weekend.
Hello? Hi. Hey.
She's like, take that exam, Mom. I'm going to be all done. I can pack up and come home. Sunday is Mother's Day. We're going to go celebrate like we always do as a family. It's Mother's Day.
Who would want to kill an individual like this? What harm would she have done to anybody that would want to make somebody end her life? And then you start saying, okay, who was she closest with? Was there a boyfriend in the picture?
Detectives learned there was, ex-boyfriend who isn't happy about being dumped.
He was in the Israeli military. He was a pretty fit guy, knew how to take care of himself. From talking to other people, he had a temper. If you're a homicide detective, you get excited about, someone like that because you think, okay, here we go, we're heading in the right direction.
Dubbed the City of Brotherly Love, Philadelphia is the most violent big city in America. At its heart, Tony Rittenhouse Square, where Shannon Schieber lived and died.
It was very unusual to have anything in the Rittenhouse Square area. It's one of the, the safest neighborhoods in the city.
Shannon's murder was kind of shocking because you just don't think that there are random attacks in neighborhoods like that.
Doesn't mean that bad things can't happen, and pretty catastrophic things. And ultimately, I guess, she lost the lottery, and so did we.
Until the moment she died, Shannon Schieber was one of life's winners.
She graduated in 3 years from Duke University with a triple major in mathematics, economics, and philosophy. Well, of course, Shannon, being competitive primarily with herself, had to go to the #1 school. And the #1 school in her field of business finance was the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business, based in Philadelphia. So she got accepted there at the age of 22 on a full scholarship, plus a stipend to begin a PhD. I mean, that is a rare occurrence. She had a warmth and outgoing nature. She would talk to everybody. She was very pretty, too, but her real beauty was on the inside. She was an incredibly kind and generous person. She was very, very giving.
Shannon's autopsy confirms she was sexually assaulted, then strangled. The question is, by who? Police learned she'd been dating fellow student Yuval Bar-Or for 5 weeks.
They had a relationship, a contentious relationship.
Shannon is very, very intelligent and very confident, very outgoing, really had a wonderful, bubbly personality. If flirting was a sport, she would have had the Olympic gold medal.
How are you? He wanted her to go back to Israel to meet his parents.
You were so nice.
She wasn't interested in doing that and told him so. And he was kind of persistent, and she asked him to bug off.
To come to meet mine this time.
This was part of the confusing aspect of the relationship, is that the relationship appeared to be over on at least 3 different occasions.
You haven't been around. I haven't seen you.
I've been really busy.
She had a habit of being very accusatory, so she would sort of accuse me of doing things. I actually was feeling very frustrated because she sort of had no inclination to listen. Some of the things she did were really infuriating. I mean, they were.
Bar-Or gets dumped for good shortly before the murder.
Shannon's friends were concerned about Yuval and the relationship he had with Shannon.
A relationship, they say, that was turning toxic.
She had had a friend whose mother had died or something, and she had gone to the funeral and was talking to one of her friends about what was going on and so forth. And he came by and said something to the effect that the next funeral you're going to will be your own.
Shannon reports the incident to the university police, who confront Bar-Or. she tells them she's lying.
Shannon actually said things that were blatantly untrue, which could have been investigated, because something's not right here.
So at that point, we need to talk to him. He was a passionate guy, so she felt threatened by him. And so when you take that into consideration, I mean, he certainly becomes a suspect.
Bar-Or is brought in and held for questioning.
Yeah, I realized now it was unavoidable to come to terms with the fact that she had been murdered, and the fact that they were looking at me. There was also a real concern that some of my actual DNA was at Shannon's apartment. There's no doubt about that, too. These thoughts were milling through my mind.
Police pull out all the stops interrogating Bar-Or.
Your gut feeling's telling you, you know what, it's this guy.
So I was finally alone for the first time with my thoughts. And I was getting very, very anxious about being locked up. And I was very angry also at everything that I'd been accused of. I looked around the room for something to do, to keep myself busy. And there, of course, there was only paper. So I sat down and made a paper airplane. And I threw it across the room, and then I made another one. I threw that across the room. I made another one. The floor was covered with paper airplanes. And the detective walked in, and he was suspicious of what's going on here.
They had this suspect, and they were pretty certain it was him. And he says, "We've got this one in our gut, that this guy's the guy that killed your daughter."
With Bar-Or in custody, police get a search warrant for his apartment.
When they go in, what they're looking for is like any kind of evidence, semen evidence, or any clothing that might have blood on it. You're looking for anything that would connect him to that scene that night.
Nothing turns up. Investigators take a DNA sample. But with no hard evidence against him, police have to let their only suspect walk free.
When I was finally released, I was forced into a gauntlet of reporters. Someone whispered in my ear that I should make sure I don't say anything to them and I should just try to get away from them as soon as possible. Which led to an infamous scene in which I appear to be guilty, trying to get away from the press.
Bar-Or's release doesn't sit well with Shannon's parents.
And I said, "Are you going to put a tail on him?" He said, "Oh, no, we don't have the resources to do that." And I said, "Well, sir," I said, "it's going to look awfully bad for you folks if you let this guy get away."
5 days after the murder, Shannon Schieber's funeral is held in her hometown of Chevy Chase, Maryland.
It was packed. Standing room only in some of the aisles and everything. I thought, what a gift that is to a parent. If you're going to have to go through this, to have all that, the friendship. The natural order of things is that children bury their parents. The parents don't bury their children.
I didn't go to Shannon's funeral. I wanted to. And the fact was that I was the person who had been closest to her. My life was a complete media circus, and I didn't want to drag that circus to her funeral, so just didn't go.
With no other suspects, the police pin their hopes on Bar-Or's DNA test.
You get the result back and it's not him. Now you're back to square one.
I was the only one who knew it wasn't me, for sure. I was relieved that it was there, but I was far more concerned with the way I'd been portrayed, made to look guilty.
Maybe Philadelphia investigators have been going at it all wrong. Now they speculate, was it a burglary? They asked the Schiebers to go through their daughter's belongings.
We had to see if there was something that was very noticeably absent. We did eventually notice some things that were missing.
A custom pen set, jewelry, and an expensive camera.
Was this a crime of opportunity? They broke in, and now your focus changes. Now you're out on the streets looking for the burglar.
The police canvassed the building. No one was buzzed in that night. Then how did the intruder get inside?
Shannon Schieber lived on a second-floor apartment on a little street. There was actually a tree right outside by where she had a little balcony with a sliding glass door.
How long would it take to climb the tree? Under 10 seconds. A small street, quiet in the early morning hours. A burglar could easily reach Shannon's balcony undetected. Then, DNA test results from blood found at the crime scene give Philadelphia police a solid new lead as to who raped and murdered Shannon Schieber.
There's only 3 kinds of DNA. There's Caucasian, Negroid, and Asian. So, the blood that's found leads us to believe that it was a black male.
Philadelphia PD thinks Shannon Schieber was the victim of a burglary gone wrong. DNA shows that whoever robbed, raped, and strangled her is African American. Find her missing belongings, and they might be a step closer to finding her killer.
We included those items on a flyer, and our detectives went to every pawn shop that we knew of to try to see if these items were sold. Nothing turned up.
It's been 3 months, and the Schiebers are in agony over their daughter's murder and investigators' lack of progress.
Everybody was telling us that they solved most of these cases fairly quickly, and that the further you get away from the crime, the more unlikely it becomes that they'll ever solve it.
The frustration level is really high now because we're no closer to catching them than we were on the first day that the homicide responded.
6 more months go by with no new leads. The case is falling off the radar. Until a call to the Philadelphia Inquirer sets off a firestorm in the city of brotherly love.
We got an anonymous phone call from a police officer saying, too bad about that Shannon Schieber girl, and too bad about the 2 other cases they're not telling you about.
The precedent to 2 other sexual assaults that happened almost a year, say, before. I still remember, it's like, oh my God, what?
The DNA lab confirms the newspaper's story. Shannon's not the rapist's first victim. It looks like she's his 3rd.
This changes the whole investigation. Now we're looking at a sexual predator.
Investigators were unable to connect Shannon to the 2 previous cases because senior officers were hushing up serious crimes.
The Shannon Schieber case became the worst and most horrific example of this phenomenon. Police in Philadelphia would manipulate crime statistics and actually take crimes and reported crimes off the books to make the city look safer. What the police in Philadelphia did was, rather than actually solve crime and arrest criminals, they would make problems go away with an eraser. In effect, the Philadelphia Police Department blinded itself to the crimes that were unfolding in the community. And by doing that, they also blinded the community to the patterns of crimes that were unfolding. And this set the stage for Shannon Schieber's murder.
Oh, that set off. It's like a fire alarm going off. There was a lot of anger at the Philadelphia Police Department.
The community was furious when we learned that there had been a serial rapist in the neighborhood, and no one had been informed about it.
This is really scary. My doors stay locked. I don't walk out alone late.
If the public was informed that there was a serial rapist, more safety measures would have been taken. So it could have prevented her murder.
We got quite angry as this was evolving. We began to refer to them as the gang that couldn't shoot straight. But that ultimately became too kind of description.
Reporters continue to dig, unearthing more disturbing information.
What we learned was, before Shannon Schieber was raped and killed, and before the other two women were raped, this same attacker had attacked two other women. There weren't 3 attacks, there were 5 attacks. The attacks had been going on for months. They were unchecked.
The what-ifs begin. What if Shannon had known there was a rapist out there? Would she have taken more precautions? And what if the police had knocked down her door?
Please, open up.
Would she be alive today?
These officers at the door were victims of the same system of downgrading and disregarding crimes. If they had known that there had been a pattern of 4 previous rapes, they might have felt that they had more probable cause to knock down that door and get in there.
All right, well, I'm going to go check out front.
The police had a very difficult choice to make when they were at that door.
And if those 2 cops kicked that door down, she would have either been rescued or at least he would have been captured.
The city is up in arms. Philly's 7,000-member police department is feeling the heat. Detectives widen their investigation to include the 4 other rape victims.
We established that there was a pattern here. They're all happening in Center City. We're only talking maybe 10 blocks from each other. They were all young, like college age. They all lived by themselves, which tends to believe that he probably stalked some of them before he did anything.
The attacker slipped into people's apartments through very narrow spaces. In one case, she slid between security bars that were only 7 to 9 inches wide.
These sexual assaults had a particular pattern. The person would enter between midnight, 1 o'clock. The person rarely spoke above a whisper, covering their eyes with a pillowcase or some garment, and talking to them all the time, whispering, don't be noisy, don't make any noise, I'm not going to hurt you. Kind of the reassuring, soft voice, which I think only terrorized people even more. Don't worry.
This sexual predator is agile, elusive. And when detectives review the 3rd victim's story, they discover he's also human.
He made a mistake and didn't get the pillowcase over in time, and she was able to see him. And now we had our first big break. We had a composite.
He's 6 feet tall, thin build, in his mid-20s, with dark hair and a tan or olive complexion.
We did thousands of tips. People would call. He has breakfast in his diner every day. I see him on the corner.
Philadelphia police create a task force. Detective Boyle works 24/7 staking out Rittenhouse Square. Female officers act as decoys. Plainclothes officers search gyms, bars, restaurants.
We had initially 6 or 7 homicide detectives working on the case. Every uniformed patrol officer in that particular Center City district was aware of the case and was actively looking for anybody suspicious.
Nearly every thin young man in the area is a suspect.
We were stopping people that look like the composite and do DNA on them.
We thought with all the additional patrols on the street that we would have this person in custody in relatively short time. But as it grew longer and longer, we became more frustrated. It was like a roller coaster ride from day to day. We would get a suspect, we'd be hot on the suspect's trail, we would think we were onto something, and then it would just fizzle out.
We know that there's somebody out there, and we just don't know who he is. We're chasing a ghost at this point.
DNA tests confirm one man in Philadelphia is responsible for raping 5 women and murdering 1. The media label him the Center City Rapist. Investigators describe him as an agile, soft-spoken, calculating predator. It's now been over a year since he killed Shannon Schieber. Since then, no new attacks.
He had stayed dormant. Where was he? Who is he? It was a Saturday morning. There was an incident where a girl was attacked right off of Rittenhouse Square. Screws were laid nicely on the sidewalk, and this bar was taken and off to the side. She had been tied up. The gentle talking, you know, I don't want to hurt you. And he had actually had her perform oral sex, and then he took a pillowcase and he made her spit it out on the pillowcase. Instead of taking it with him, he gently puts it on top of there. It was to let us know, I'm back. Now he's toying with us.
It was scary and unnerving that he had resurfaced after laying low for so many months, and that he still felt that he could attack successfully in Philadelphia despite the stepped-up police presence.
Headlines every day in the newspaper, and a neighborhood that was completely terrorized by this individual. People who lived in that area wanted to know what the police were doing to catch this individual.
The DA and new police commissioner tried to dampen the community's fear.
Police Commissioner Timoney and I started to go around to women's groups. We had a huge turnout, standing room only, lots of questions, angry women, frightened women. Everybody was on tenterhooks.
The community was looking for answers, and I think that they were very assertive in their questioning of Police Commissioner Timoney.
The DNA found on the latest victim links to the previous assaults and indicates the attacker is a black male. But the woman describes her rapist as white.
We put flyers all over Center City, in every store, every bar, every pole, and we had thousands made up. We put it everywhere.
Tips flood in. 7 of them point the finger at a bartender in the Rittenhouse Square neighborhood, Chris Duffy.
We go out there knocking on the door.
Yeah. How you doing, pal? We need to talk to you for a little bit.
Detectives LaTorre and Boyle haul him in. And the first thing out of his mouth?
He says, okay, you got me. Me and my partner are like, oh. I said, what do you mean we got you? It's like, yeah, he said it was me.
After all this time, could catching the killer really be this simple?
What do you mean it was you? And he said, yeah, I was drunk last night. I said, hold on. I said, you know, I'm here because I think you're the Center City rapist. And he went,
Anna wasn't there. It's not me.
I said, just relax. Let me have your DNA.
The DNA test clears Duffy. The only promising lead left dies.
One by one, the things start to fall off. Then one day you look around and you don't have any suspects. The case is cold.
The police weren't coming up with anybody because he was, like many predators, part of the fabric of a city. There was nothing about him that stood out.
Months pass, and no new attacks.
We knew he wasn't going to stop. We knew this type of a predator would continue to seek women and harm individuals. Maybe he went somewhere. Maybe he's overseas. Maybe he's in another jurisdiction. It was most frustrating because we didn't know where he was or what he was doing.
The Center City rapist vanished into thin air.
We wanted to get this case solved. I mean, after what we've been through, I think one of the first things my husband and I would talk, we were really sad and alone nights, you know, like, oh my God, we can't let this happen to another family. This is just horrible.
There comes a point where basically everything that they can do has been done. So they decide to scale the task force back.
Detective Latore stays on the case, checking unsolved rapes around the country. Then, a bulletin out of Fort Collins, Colorado.
So, all right. I'll have to call you back.
I get computer printouts, and I'm looking in, and they have a series of 8 rapes that happened, where the guy goes in through the windows in these apartments.
The rapes in Fort Collins, 1,800 miles away, are eerily similar to those in Center City. The victims are women in their early 20s, living near a university.
Women waking to find this man in their room who pounced on them, put his hand over their nose and mouth, covered their face with a pillowcase, the same MO.
Is it the same DNA?
Yeah. Hey guys.
Turns out that their DNA and our human DNA genome were a perfect match. Wow. That was the aha moment. Our guy is out in Fort Collins.
With the heart up here and the throat down here, I said, okay, you know he's out here, but where is he? We don't know where he's at. How are we going to find him?
The answer? Digital sleuthing. Using credit card information, investigators create a database of all the people who used a credit card in Philadelphia and Fort Collins within the past 3 years. A total of 300.
Whittle out the old folks and the women, because we know we were looking for a man, and then we got it down to 13 people.
Using a credit card database, investigators discover only one man in Fort Collins, Colorado, also lived in Center City, Philadelphia. Troy Graves. 29-year-old Graves is now an enlisted man at an airbase near Fort Collins, living with his new wife. In Philadelphia, police track down an ex-girlfriend of Graves. She tells them he had a peculiar habit.
He used to get up in the middle of the night, say he can't sleep, and then go out for a walk.
Which is the same thing that the wife in Fort Collins said. He'd like to go out at night, and he would come back, he would have scratches.
The DNA found in Shannon's apartment points to an African American. To definitively link Troy Graves to the rapes and Shannon Schieber's murder, police need his DNA. He refuses. No DNA, no case. But investigators do know the killer's blood type is A positive. They ask the Air Force if Graves' blood type is on file.
Air Force said yes and calls back and they say his blood type's A positive. Well, now it's like, wow, that's enough right there to charge him.
Mr. Graves.
Graves is arrested and forced to provide a DNA sample. After a 4-year investigation, is this mild-mannered married man the calculating predator who raped 14 women and murdered Shannon Schieber?
We had finally narrowed down a human genome out of almost 300 million people in this country to one person, Troy Graves.
It was probably one of the happiest days, of my career, to find out that we had finally focused on an individual and it looked like that was our guy.
We got that one call that day, and they said, Mr. and Mrs. Schieber, we have the person who murdered your daughter. Oh my God, oh my God. How did that make us feel? We just couldn't believe it.
Finally, a step in this ordeal was over. We now knew that the person that had killed our daughter was going to have to answer to what he did to Shannon and to quite a number of other women.
Troy Graves basically confessed the Shannon Schieber thing, everything. After you talk to Troy Graves, you find out what happens that night. Stalked her, went up the tree, went in.
When he sneaked up on her, he put his hand over her mouth and his arm around her neck and throat, and she began to struggle. Graves was trying to calm her down, but she wasn't about to be calmed. She was obviously frightened out of her mind.
She was the first one that fought back. And when she started to resist and scream, he was afraid, I'm going to get caught. While he's trying to muffle Shannon Schieber's cries, she bites him. She drew blood off his hand. He flung his wrist, and that put the blood on the wall.
During the course of the sexual assault, a neighbor next door knocked on the door
Shannon, are you okay?
and called her name.
Shannon? I'm calling the police, Shannon.
But she couldn't speak at that point because Graves had his arm around her throat and his hand over her nose and mouth. The more she struggled, the tighter he clasped his hand and arm around her throat.
He had to quiet her, and that was the way to quiet her, by wrapping his arms around her neck and strangling her till she could not scream any longer.
Made his way over the balcony, and within a few short moments, he was home in his apartment 9 blocks away.
Graves admits he killed Shannon around the time her neighbor knocked on the door, then fled. Had the officers at the door kicked it in, they would have found Shannon dead and Graves gone.
We're wrestling. So I put my hand over her mouth.
It turns out that in the months after the murder, there were plenty of opportunities to nab Troy Graves.
The police stopped him about 10 times in town at all hours of the night and asked him who he was, where he was going, what he was doing. He always presented as a quiet, attractive, solid-looking person.
Ultimately, the Sheebers blame the police department's deep sixing of cases for Shannon's death.
The police in Philadelphia, from my perspective, set Shannon up for murder. They did not tell her that there was a serial rapist working her community. Tell me how I should feel.
I can understand their anger, it's their daughter. All we really wanted to do was to get them some justice, to find out who did this. I would hope that they would understand that.
Graves pleads guilty to murder and 14 counts of sexual assault.
The state really wanted to execute my daughter's murderer. And we said, no, you do want revenge. You want to just, I would destroy that person. But we didn't want to have to answer this before God someday, that we really helped put someone to death.
He gets life without parole, plus 120 years. He can still appeal.
People ask me many times if I found peace. Yes, I have. I'm very happy with the outcome. My family's at peace. This quote is very special to me. The longer you focus on your misfortunes, the greater is their power to cause you harm.